Hello, hello. How are you doing? This is another week of H to H chat. And if you're joining us today, you are in for some awesomeness because we are about to talk to one of my favorite humans on earth, a guy that I have known now in a short span of my life, but what feels like forever in my life. And that's because he's turned into such an amazing friend. When we get together, the fun never stops, and we also speak the same language. Ted Rubin is one of my favorite humans because he stands behind everything that he says, and he is very active in the things he stands behind, meaning he doesn't just say it, he does it. And one of the things that he has done in his life is really come to be known for R&R, which is return on relationship. He's got a bunch of other things that I'm sure you all know about, but we'll get talking to him about, which are a various number of other things that he is really passionate about, and I'm sure they'll weave their way into the conversation as we go. Now, one thing that you all may know, and for those of you who don't, is that that this is called H2H Chat, and H2H Chat is built on the platform of H2H. H2H came to fruition at an event that Ted was a part of. And not only was he a part of it, he helped to start the movement of H2H. I literally was on stage. I presented the thought or idea of H2H at, I believe it was Bloomberg. And Ted had me go back a screen. I went forward after the screen that said there's no B2B or B2C, it's H2H. He had me go back a screen. I showed that screen. He took a picture of it, put it out on Twitter. Before you knew it, everyone else followed his lead and started to tweet it out as well. And within 48 hours, it got over 80 million impressions. It was translated into over 15 languages. It had over 2,000 bloggers talking about it, and it took off. And from that point forward, my life changed forever, and the idea or the concept of H2H changed forever, and that is much thanks due to Ted for helping to make that happen. So, so for those of you who don't know the story behind that, that is who Ted is. And now, now we are going to present today a little bit more about millennials, but I just wanted to say first and foremost that his saying, his platform, R&R, plus if you think about it, H2H, human to human, and return on relationship fit together so well. They're like cousins or brothers and brothers or brothers and sisters, however you want to look at it. It equals awesome because it really does fit together so nicely. So that's why I'm really excited to talk to Ted. Enough of the intros. I'm going to bring Ted in right now and say, Ted, how are you today?
I'm doing really well, Brian. You know, I've had a tough 48 hours, but just like you mentioned, anytime I get to speak to you, and I mean that sincerely, you know, from my heart, it brightens up my day. And I love, you know, that you mentioned that moment because, you know, I might not be that smart, but I am smart enough to recognize a shareable moment. But what I don't think you give yourself enough credit for is the way you posed in front of that slide. I think might have had a lot to do with how much it was shared. It wasn't just about the brilliance of the slide or the thought or the meme. It was your action in front of the screen when I asked you to go back, because of course you couldn't just put the slide back and let me take a picture. You had to jump out in front of the screen and pose for me, which, as I said, I think is what made it all the more shareable. So it really, and truth be told, it sounds like I'm joking, and in a way I am, but the truth of the matter is it really just shows who you are, and it made you a whole part of that idea. It wasn't just here's a slide Bryan Kramer presented. It's here's a slide, here's Bryan, you know, in kind of an action shot. So I'm really excited to be here. I always love talking to you. As I tell you all the time, I'm usually disappointed if it's just you and your better half is not here. So all my love to Courtney. I wish she was here to join us. I understand she's got other things that she has to attend to, but really excited to get started and have a great conversation.
Yeah.
I'm really excited because I love your audience. I know that you have great followers who are really engaged, and it's going to make for a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thanks. Let's dive right in. The topic of this today is busting the myth of marketing to millennials. And I think it couldn't be a greater topic. I think we spend so much time focusing on what millennials, how to market to millennials. I'm going to throw you a softball here, and just to kick it off, and then we can dive in even deeper. You may just go as deep as you like here with this question, but how are you seeing the marketing? How are millennials seeing marketing right now? What is their attitude that you see?
Well, obviously I'm not a millennial, and I don't necessarily go out and ask them the way they see things. I just watch who they are and what they do. And first of all, one of the problems I have with the whole marketing to millennials thing is that millennials are this huge demographic. I mean, they encompass people from all parts of the world, all different economic levels, all different emotional education levels, and they're being grouped together as one group. I mean, you don't hear a lot right now, like, oh, how do you market to boomers? You hear, how do you market to people in their late 50s and early 60s who live in the New York tri-state area or who have a certain level of education? So I hear way too much generalizing, number one. I see a lot of people focusing on the environment rather than, in other words, the environment has changed, but it's changed for all of us. So, for the most part, I think millennials are just like you and me. I don't think they're any different. I think they have the same needs, desires, wants, hopes, and dreams as any human being has. They want shelter, they want financial security, they want to have some fun. I think what's really affected them more than anything is not a difference in genetic makeup, which is the way I seem to always hear it being talked about, but it's about environment. And I think that same environment is affecting a lot of us. And one of the things I say to bring a little clarity to this is I like to say that I believe boomers were the original millennials. In the way that we talk about them now. But millennials demand authenticity. Millennials have much higher expectations. By the way, I'm talking about the good things now, not all the negative crap that I hear that I don't really agree with. That, millennials want to change the world. Millennials want to make a difference. Millennials care about causes. Well, to me, and maybe it's because I'm part of that generation, but I'm really a little bit more the tail end. But boomers were really the first people that really made that a public thing. Whether it was the hippie time in the 60s, it was marching on Washington, it was changing the right to vote, it was all the different, it was stopping a war. The problem, and where I refer to the environment, is we had to get a job at some point. We couldn't continue doing it because the only way to do it was to be there, was to go in front of these groups. Now, you can be a part of a cause 24/7 from anywhere in the world while you're at work, while you're at your kid's Little League game, while you're at the PTA meeting. And I think it's really changed a lot. And it's why it seems that millennials are so much more involved and dedicated to those things, because they can be without leaving what they need to be doing in order to be there for their families and their businesses and things like that.
Now, we have several millennials that are on this chat right now. A couple that I've seen just come through, like Bryan Fanzo and Rachel Miller, a couple of my favorite millennials, and I don't think they embody this next question. But there, I believe, is a large number of millennials that have been talked about as being the entitlement generation. Do you agree or disagree?
I get the idea. And again, one of the reasons is I think because of the environment, because we hear so much more about it. But that's not millennials, Bryan. That's called young people. Okay? Every generation says the new generation is lazy, they're not hardworking, they don't care enough. Why? Because they're young. It's like when, for all this time we've been hearing, or actually it's starting to change now because millennials are getting older, but for the last few years, millennials don't care about insurance. Of course they don't. They're 22 years old, 24 years old. Did you care about insurance when you were 24 years old? All of a sudden now millennials then you hear millennials suddenly caring about insurance. Why? Because they're 34, like Fanzo, or 35, they've got 30 kids like Bryan, and insurance becomes an important part of their lives. Same thing about saving. Young people don't save, so millennials don't save. All of a sudden they're in their 30s, and they're starting to think about the fact that they need money for college education for their kids, that they need money to retire on. I think it's about young people, and I think maybe 90% is a high number. I'd say 70% of what I hear about millennials is not about some new generation. It's not about a new thing. It's not about a new way of thinking. It's about young people. So as far as the laziness, or the entitlement, sure, there's a group out there, because I think that our generation has had a very nice level and quality of life and living, and we've been able to give more to our kids. So of course their expectations are higher. If you grow up in a home where you're eating peanut butter and jelly and mac and cheese every night for dinner, I know that's what you like to eat, Brian, but I'm talking about when you have to eat that stuff for dinner. Or you grow up in a home where you have filet mignon every night, your expectations are going to be different. So I don't see them that way. I see most young people in many ways much more ambitious, and a big part of that is not because they're different, it's because opportunity is at their doorstep, very different than you and I. I mean, like when you talk about your job in college, you talk about delivering Domino's pizza, and trying to figure out a way to get more tips. But now, kids in college are first of all, just the simple part of starting blogs, building a social presence, becoming an influencer, working for brands. But beyond that, the easy ability to raise money and the ability to start businesses for so much less money than it used to take at one time, as recently as 10 years ago. You want to start a web business back in the early 2000s, you had to raise millions of dollars. Now most startups, in the very beginning, are raising tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. So I think that it's just the opposite of that. But two things that are happening. Number one is they're young people, but they have a name now, millennials, so we're calling them that. But number two is things are so much more visible. So when you knew one kid who was a little entitled, you saw one and you knew it, and then there were 5 other kids that were okay, but now you're posting about it. Now, of course, I don't mean you in particular, and I'm posting about it, and other people in the audience are posting about it, and we all know one lazy millennial. All of a sudden it becomes, oh, they're the lazy generation. So to me, it's totally out of sync. It's also because of what we see them doing. We see them like this in front of their phones all the time, and we think that that's being lazy. But actually, or being uncommunicative. Actually, I think our kids are way more communicative than we ever were. They're talking to all their friends all the time at scale on 5 different platforms. I mean, and I think the brain's evolving to a point where it's becoming easier for us as humans to do that.
That's an excellent point. I think I agree. It's all about young people entering into a new market. The difference is, and actually this has been said a couple of times. I think Fanzo said it as well, that and a bunch of other people here, that that the difference of it is tech, the choices of tech and social media. It puts a magnifying glass on people in general. What do you think is the balance then? If they're using tech, they're using social media in it, and it really highlights what they're doing. For instance, Snapchat and now Instagram. I'm sure you have some thoughts there, but it's a very public or visible world into the background or the insights of what a person does in between, in the moments that we never were able to see when you and I were kids. We never saw these kinds of insights. So, you know what? A bunch of people were telling me you said human, and I didn't do this. So here we go. From now on, I'll hit that every time you say human. Sorry about that. So, what do you think about that? Do you think that and I guess the question that I am asking you is, being a person who's written about and has a passion for sharing, as you know, where do you think the line of sharing is, especially with millennials? Is there the possibility for oversharing?
Well, there's 2 sides to this that you really have to keep in mind. I've been recently talking a lot about self-awareness. And there's this guy out there who's got a couple of followers. What's his name again? Gary something. Oh, Gary Vaynerchuk, something like that. And he has this. He's been talking about self-awareness, but he talks about it in a very different way than I do. He talks about the self-awareness, about what you're good at, what you're not good at, what to focus on. The self-awareness I've been focusing on a lot is being self-aware of how you're affecting your life and others. It can be as simple as walking through an airport and thinking twice before you stop in the middle of an aisle and just put your bags down because you're blocking 20 people behind you. Or the fact that you're speaking and you're not smiling and someone thinks you're angry at them, and that kind of self-awareness. Or it's the self-awareness about the fact that you're maybe oversharing, or you're sharing things that will live forever or that are helping you in a good or bad way to build your brand. One of the things I talk about a lot is that a brand is what a business or a person does. A reputation is what people remember and share. And I think that all of us, and this isn't just millennials, I think we all have to learn this lesson, is that you have to just think. And I think it's a momentary thought. I don't think you really have to overthink this. I think too many people are erring on the other side, saying, "Oh my God, you can't post that. You got to watch what you do." And people tell me sometimes, I overpost, and you shouldn't be posting about politics, and that's a whole other discussion that I'm about to write a blog post about, and I'd love to talk about. But I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I want people to know who I am and what I think, and I think this is the ultimate time to be sharing that. But here's the other side of it that I was referring to. The problem is that we get all this back patting and support very often about bad topics from our friends, and it allows us to think that the bad move we're making is actually a good move. So I'm going to explain that a little further. Back in the day when you and I first started our jobs, and I know you're younger than me, Bryan, I don't want to make anybody think any different. What are you, 2 years younger than me, 3, something like that?
2.5.
But when you and I were in our first jobs, if we screwed up, if we said something stupid to our boss, or we made a pronouncement in the office that was dumb, the most people that heard it was maybe the guy sitting in the cubicle next to us and our boss, at most, maybe a few people in the office. And that was it. And very often the guy next to you might have one guy might have said, "Hey, Bryan, glad you finally said that." And 2 others probably looked at you and said, "Dude, like seriously?" But what happens now is we're putting this all out publicly, and a lot of young people, because, by the way, this is not because they're millennials, because they're young people. We're young people. We're dissatisfied. We think everybody older than us is stupid. I mean, I still think the people older than me are stupid. I mean, let's face it. I'm still young next to guys. Oh boy, shoot! I'm turning 59 in about 3 months. So even guys in their 60s are older than me. And what happens is we jump in, we make a statement that probably should have just been set aside. And then 300 of our friends jump in and like our post. So then when Ted or Bryan, go to the guy who made this dumb statement as a mentor and says, "Hey, you know what, George, you might not have wanted to say that. What are you talking about? 300 of my friends liked it. It's awesome." And then he gets this support that in all likelihood 20, 30 years ago, that same person would have said, "Really, Ted, you don't think that was a good idea? Should I stop saying that?" And he would have had enough time, whether it was hours, days, or weeks, to think about it before his next opportunity to make that statement came, and be able to back off that bad statement. But what happens now is we're making these pronouncements, and then at the age of 22, 25, 27, our brains just aren't developed enough to really take in all the feedback we're getting. Like you and I now, you in your 40s, me in my 50s, we've been around, and by the way, this is about experience. This has nothing to do with brains. This has nothing to do with generation. This has to do with having the time and putting in the mistakes and making them, because I made tons of them, okay? And having learned when I should be listening to somebody and how that echo chamber works. So we're a little bit more experienced in that, and we can see, like, yeah, I got 300 likes, but you know what? Bryan Kramer called me up, and I really respect what he has to say. And he told me, forget all those likes, dude. You got to back off this. And then I'm also open enough to have a conversation with Bryan where we have a back and forth, and maybe I give him a little bit more of my side, and he might even come around and say, "You know what, Ted, I agree with you." But what's happening now with a lot of young people is they put it up to get the support of all their friends, and then their ears are totally closed to hearing any kind of feedback of a way they could do it better. And they're getting themselves into trouble. And then the second part of that is what you mentioned in the beginning, is it doesn't go away. It's there. And even if they delete it, there's a good bet somebody else shared it or screenshot it or did something. So I think to back up now, this goes all back just to a little bit of self-awareness. And that self-awareness starts out by, what am I posting? And again, I'm talking about, like, I hesitate for a moment before every post. I'm talking about a moment. This is not something that takes me weeks, although there are some things I will wait hours. I mean, I'm sure you remember. I've even called you sometimes. I'm about to post something, and I say, hey, Bryan, let me bounce this off you to see what you think about it, or vice versa. I think you've done the same thing with me. Taking that moment, and then, and this goes for any kind of digital marketing, especially social media, make sure you're listening. Pay attention to the comments. Recognize who they're coming from. Is this someone I respect, or is this just numbers? Sure, I got 300 likes, but who did I get them from? Are these people I really want to emulate? And just think that through as you move along, and then be ready to bob and weave a little bit, the way we tell brands to do all the time, to listen to what customers are saying, to not just stick with a campaign if it's being taken the wrong way. And I think that's a big part of it. And I just think that comes with age. And it's something that you and I, and the people that mentored us, did it for us, and it's our job to mentor and help younger people understand that themselves.
Turning off the microphone here so I don't spare you with the background noise. I couldn't agree more on how people are, how millennials are responding, how they see things, how they take advantage of the now generation, the right now generation, if you will, and what they're responding to and how quickly versus what you're talking about. That was a lot of ground that you just covered, and a lot of tweets were being generated, and even more so, congratulations, because we just started trending on Twitter, which normally takes we take a lot longer to trend. So obviously some great content here. Great stuff going on. I really appreciate the the hard thinking that you have put into your content and how you're getting it out there and how consistent you are. My question to you is, how do you teach consistency the way that you see it? How do you teach millennials or Generation Z, the up-and-comers, as you're talking, the youth, the younger generation, to be consistent, to see their holistic brand, their personal brand, if you will, because that's really where you've focused in the last 10 years. If I'm looking at you in the right light, how do you teach that consistency to younger brands? How do you build a brand? How do you build that personal brand based upon consistency? Is my question.
So here's something I was taught years and years ago when I was in my early 20s, and I had a mentor that I really respected. Was he said, number one, always try to put yourself in the seat of that other person. Try to understand, the way they want to hear something. How did you want to hear it when you were that age? Use storytelling as a method to do that. So what I try to do mostly is I try to set an example. I know that I hate getting preached to. I always have. I especially, even obviously, just like everything, I was much more sensitive to it when I was younger. Like I said, and this is not a joke anymore, I'm approaching 60, and I've learned a lot. And I've learned that when people repeat a story to me for the 5th time, I just nod and smile. I don't tell them, yeah, you told me this already. And I guess a big part of that came from watching my dad grow old and recognizing that this was his only pleasure. Why should I, as a kid, you can't do that. Your dad tells you something for the 2nd time, you go, Dad, you told me that already. And, so what I try to do is I try not to be that person repeating these things over and over to somebody. I try to teach by example. I'll give you a very simplified way that I can explain it. Somebody knows my return on relationship thing, and they make a mistake with the hashtag. They use ROR. We won't spend 10 minutes talking about why it's RONR instead of ROR, because that's for another podcast or another hangout. But instead of me saying to them, you're doing it wrong, I just correct it when I retweet it. And my hope and expectation is that they'll see it, that they'll see the difference. And I do the same a lot when I comment. I'll see a conversation going on with 2 guys I know, or 1 guy I know, or woman or girl I know, and I'll see that I don't think they're behaving the way that I think would be in their best interests in that conversation. So I jump in and I try to have that same conversation in as polite and professional manner as I can. And, again, this has taken me years to do. I was a type A. I was the first guy to jump on people when I was younger. But I had a great mentor that taught me the same thing. He taught me by example. He took me to meetings. He showed me the way he behaved. He would relate a story to me about someone that dissed him or insulted him in a meeting. And he would kind of tell me the story of how he reacted. He wouldn't say it as if he was teaching. He would just talk about, I said this, I said, kind of smile, thank him for his input. He didn't say, Ted, this is the way you should do it. So I do a lot of trying to teach by example. When I speak, when I'm on podcasts, I tell people a lot of times, follow me on this platform, see the way I engage, see what I do, rather than outlining how to do it. So, that's a big part of it. And then, of course, I pay attention to my audience. There are some guys, I'm going to give an example because you said he's here. Bryan Fanzo, what I love about Bryan is I can talk straight to him. And it took me a little while to figure that out because I was sensitive to the fact that maybe he'd get insulted if I told him something about something he didn't like. But what I've learned with him is he listens. Sometimes he does what I suggest. Sometimes he doesn't, of course. But usually when he doesn't, he'll say to me, I'm not going to do that, but this is why. And then there are other people in the same realm who I've learned I can't talk to like that. So what I'll do more of is just trying to, I'll try more of setting an example or leading them to something that I'm doing because I know that if I try to give them advice, it'll go to deaf ears. So just like, again, we talk about with brands or anything else, I've tried very hard to understand who the audience I'm communicating with and communicate on a platform, on a level, and in a way that'll have the most effect on them.
Well, you said Bryan Fanzo, which supposedly, I think the interwebs reached out to him and popped him on to be a surprise guest.
Yeah, but you know what? Did you have to bring him in? He's got like this smooth skin. He's got no wrinkles. I'm going to have to back up a little bit because I'm looking way too old close to that screen once Fanzo comes on.
I disagree. Trust me, when I look as good and in shape as you, Ted, whenever I get
I
to
know, right?
Sign me up now. I will check that box today.
So we've got Bryan on here as a surprise guest, and thanks for hopping on, Bryan. I felt like we can't sit here and talk about millennials without the voice of a millennial. I'm
not sure he's really a millennial. I keep kind of
barely. I was born in '81. I was born in '81.
Well, although the backwards hat, the beard hanging down low, all that shit, it certainly brings a little bit of it in there. So thanks, Bryan.
But you said something. We've been talking about something interesting, Ted, and so I invited Bryan on here last minute. Again, thanks for jumping on to just make sure that this was a balanced conversation for the next 5 minutes. And I'll pose this question to both of you guys, and we can kind of take turns talking about this. But the question is, how do you see the next 5 years going based upon the technology that we have and the amount of time that we have to continue the journey of making money, because I see a lot of young people really expressing themselves and building their own personal brands and doing new things and being first-time early adopters. Much more quickly, perhaps, and again, this is up for debate, than older generations. So how do you see that generating jobs and generating new positions, or even growing that technology in different ways? Bryan, you want to take that first, and then Ted, you can follow up.
Sure. I think the importance of not sucking has actually kind of increased with more technology and more video, and I say that with as much love as I possibly could, because I've read both Human to Human and Return on Relationships, and they've been such a key element of my success and really what I've been working hard on doing. And to me, a lot of that comes down to technology, the more technology you have, more places we have to go, not only does it take up more time, but it becomes harder and harder to be fake and harder to put on something that we are not. And I think we've come a culture that we were able to be fake, to suck offline, but make an appearance of us online. And I believe that we are going through that change today. And I think someone actually was tweeting about it, and I wanted to kind of challenge in the sense where it's not about, we don't have a professional life and a personal life. We have one life. And if you're able to embrace your vulnerabilities and understand that your vulnerabilities are oftentimes what allow you to stand out from the noise and kind of convey that true, honest relationship building, I think that's where the technology enables us. I think if we live in that other mindset where it says, what can I post and what can technology allow me to do that I am not, is the wrong way. And I really think that the millennials have the megaphone that every baby boomer wished they had, and that's the social aspect. Because my dad was a baby boomer that was in Pittsburgh, and unfortunately his megaphone was stuck to only the places in Pittsburgh and the places he traveled. And my megaphone is 400 channels on 400 different social networks. So I look at it as not what the technology allows us to start doing, but really the person that we're able to convey online. And to me, it's really about that idea of not online versus offline, but and I know you kind of both embody that. So what say you, Ted?
Well, first of all, dude, you are deep. Jeez. You're digging down like, I don't really know I don't know if I could compete with that, but what I'd like to take it to the next step, and I think you were going there, is that, and I've said this all along, it's not about the platforms, about the technology, and part of this is more my hope than where I see things going. My hope is that people start using these platforms to build deeper relationships, to connect more, not just to scale. We hear that word scale so much. Get a lot of followers and reach more people. And by the way, a lot of value in that. I'm not taking away from the whole, reach thing. But the fact is we've got this amazing opportunity, and it goes into the whole return on relationship of how, looking people in the eye digitally, that what I'm hoping is that with all this amazing technology, that we take that opportunity to get to know people better, to dig in a little bit deeper. I mean, there's just no excuses now. But the problem is, and this has to do sometimes, it's not just about us as individuals, it's about our companies, it's about the jobs we have and what people expect us to do, and back to the whole expectations conversation. So, it used to be, and I'm making up numbers here, hey, you have to contact 100 people every week in your job, in your sales department. And now all of a sudden, you can connect with a lot more. But what I'm going to say is connect with that same 100, but really connect with them. Look at who they are. Look at their background. When you get on a phone call with them, know where they went to school. Know what their likes and dislikes are, because it's all out there at your fingertips. But some of the companies are saying, oh, no, now because you have these capabilities, it's got to be 200 every week you got to get in touch with. And I think we have to push back a little bit and understand that whole quality over quantity thing, and that now we have the ability to do it so much better. Look, I tell a story a lot. I know I haven't told it here before, but when I graduated college, it was 1980, and I went to work in the investment business, but I was on the sales side. And my dad was a salesman. And, after a couple of weeks, a few days there, I get a call from my dad, and he knew that part of my job was getting appointments. And he said, so do you have your first appointment? I said, yeah. He said, when? I said, Friday. He said, great, what time is your appointment? I said, 10 o'clock. He goes, what time are you going to get there? I said, I don't know, about 5 to 10. He goes, no, get there at 9 o'clock. Walk around the neighborhood, see what other businesses are in the neighborhood, go in the building, look at the board, see what other companies are there, get into the office at least 20 to 30 minutes early and see if his or her secretary or assistant can get you into the office so you can see what photos on the wall, what diplomas are there. And the point of this whole thing, he said to me, was because you want to make, Ted, what we call emotional connection. And the way you make emotional connection is by talking about something that's important to them, not something that's important to you. Because, of course, my question was, well, what does that have to do with me selling them, XYZ? And he's like, it has nothing to do with specifically the sale. It has to do with them letting you into their world and them knowing that you care about them. And, that was really hard because there were no books. There was no place to look this stuff up. You had to get there. You had to take this all in moments before. Now we have Google, we have LinkedIn, we've got Facebook, and there's just absolutely no excuse. But guess what? I'm still going to meetings with clients when I'm setting them up and introducing them to companies, and their sales guys and business development guys are going in, and the first question out of their mouths is, oh, how long have you been here at Kraft? Seriously? I mean, you didn't bother looking at LinkedIn before you got here, so instead you could have said, wow, I see you've been here for 5 years. You could probably give me a lot of insight into what's going on at the company and what's important to you. I mean, and that's just something that's as simple as that. I mean, there are other things a little deeper. You know, does he like golf? Does he like tennis? Is he a father or grandfather? So you can get in the conversation that are important. And to me, my hope, and I'm seeing it happen in some parts, but mostly it's on an individual basis. Bryan Fanzo or Bryan Kramer or this one recognizes this is a value. But a big part of that is that we have to pass that into people, that it's not about the platforms, it's about the people. I know I'm going back to the H to H and the R and R and the, you know, Bryan, I know you don't use it much anymore, but I loved your hashtag show you care, you know, and because that's what it is. It's showing that you have interest in what's important to them.
No, and you know what, Ted? I think that element, the show you care, for me, the reason that for those that, you know, show you care became because it said, how did I get on Ted Rubin's radar? How did Bryan Kramer and I connect and become friends and do the work we've done together? And my answer kept being, I found ways to show I cared. And it wasn't, I was really great at tweeting, or I can leverage technology. The technology really is the interesting piece, where it was my ability to leverage the technology so that I could provide that conversation. And Ted, like you, my dad had always told me, you know, like any meeting that I would go into, he would make sure he knew what their favorite drink was and who their favorite NFL team was. And for me, social allows me to do that at a scale like we've never seen before. But I think, to your point, the aspect of not understanding either how to use that or when to use that, or heaven forbid not using it. I mean, your personal brand is your first impression, but it doesn't guarantee you anything if you can't not only back it up or convey that relationship. And I think that's the mistake, and it's not millennials, I think it's the digital generation, is that we think one of those is actually replacing something. Really, it's just that opportunity for us to create that good first impression, but it's up to us to actually execute beyond that first impression. But that first impression, let's face it, even when I meet someone face to face and they say, Bryan, I'm going to take you to the back of this room over here to introduce you to somebody, give me a minute. The first thing I do is I Google their name, I go onto LinkedIn, I understand where they worked and how long they worked there, because heaven forbid I go over there and shake their hand and I didn't know those things, because to me, that is that element of, I want to stand out for what they can learn about me, not stand out because I didn't take a second to understand who they were.
I want to just continue. Bryan, I just wanted, because it's right on point of something Bryan just said. He just talked about how he's about to jump into that back room, and he very quickly looks up. By the way, that's because he is younger than us and much faster, and his fingers type a lot faster. But what I do is the second part of that, and it's something I try to teach people all the time, is that I record every person I meet. I collect business cards. I collect names. But I don't just take those business cards. They all go into my database. They all get labeled with where I met the person, when I met the person, what event it was at, what date it was at. And I would say, you know, depending on how many people I met at that time and whether I had time, I'll put in some notes about something we spoke about. And this all goes into my phone. This all goes in my contacts. And the next time I meet that person, I can tell them when I met with them, probably what we talked about. And then I even go so far as that after my first communication with them, I cut and paste the first email I had with them into my contacts file so that I have context about them. Now, there's two things that happens. Either I'm lucky enough that I see their name on a name tag, I can quickly look up where I met them, and I have some relevant stuff to say when I first talked to them, and they're like, oh my God, he remembers me, or he remembered our conversation. Or even some people say to me, well, what if that person sees you looking up their name? You know, I get even people look at me and go, wow, you have all that in there? Like, you took the time to write down when you met me. I just think that this is really important about how what Bryan does when he initially connects with somebody, and what you can do after the fact and before you meet with them the next time.
So guys, last question before we move on to the questions, to the Q&A, and I want to ask you you both this, and I want to talk to you about mentoring. Between generations. Where do you see mentoring going, and how do you see it? Is it something that's sustainable, or does and please kind of speak on behalf of the generation, not just yourself, but where you see the generation going? Because I know each of you you guys are more progressive than a lot of people that are out there. So think about the generation in totality, okay? And as you answer this question, let me know. Ted, we're going to start with you first this time, and let me know, where do you see mentoring with the dual generations, Ted's generation, Bryan's generation? Ted, go ahead.
I think in many ways mentoring has become a lot easier, especially if you believe in doing it the way I do it, which is about setting an example, which is about taking a lead, which is saying, see, like my dad used to say, do like I say, like I do. And my line has always been to my daughters, do like I do. And I do my best to lead by example. And the ability is there's so many more people you can affect that way because we have an audience, we have people following us. So many more of those people. We also know where they live. In other words, I know Bryan Fanzo's page. I see his page on Facebook. I see his Snapchat. I see everything he has. If I want to mentor Bryan, even if he doesn't ask me for it, I can now go to his page and make comments in things that he's writing and share things on his board in ways that now they're coming to his attention. So I think in many ways, if you have the patience and you care enough, there's so many more people that you can have an effect on, not just that one-to-one, hi, Ted, this is Bryan, I'd like you to mentor me, can we speak on the phone once a week about what's going on in my life? I can actually be much more involved, and I can mentor people that don't even know I'm mentoring them. And that's what I love about this digital generation, is that I can mentor them just by going to where they are, being in their view, being a part of what they do. So that's my take.
But Ted, let's reverse that just real quickly, Bryan. Hold tight, Bryan. But can you be mentored? Has your generation? Can the generation be mentored by the same generation, or how are you? Do you have a mentor?
I have two different types of mentors to really just narrow it down. I have older mentors, absolutely. And when I say older, I really should make that. I have professional mentors who I think are beyond my capabilities in certain areas who mentor me. Again, in my world, it's not, hi, would you like to mentor me? It's people that I go to for advice, whether I have one, and usually some of them cross over, some of them are very, very specific, and then I have younger mentors. I mean, Bryan's one of my mentors, and I tell people this freely all the time. I mean, Bryan teaches me how to use apps, and we've got this great relationship because I'll go to Bryan and say, listen, Bryan taught me Snapchat, Bryan taught me Periscope. Now, he also knew enough that he didn't show me, oh no, Ted, you're doing it wrong, you need to do it this way. He taught me the basics of how to use it, because that's what I look for. I am not intuitive when it comes to technology. And then he knew, like, he'll look at me and go, okay, now you figure out how you're going to best use this to develop relationships, do things like that. So I am always looking for younger mentors, as well as people that I think are farther on a path professional than me, because I'm very into insight. It's just like, people are amazed when I'm talking about politics and when I'm very, very firmly in one camp, and that I'm totally open to people being critical of it and coming on my page and telling me different, because it gives me perspective into how they think. I mean, look, I'm a Democrat. I'm much more of a CNN or MSNBC watcher than Fox, but I watch Fox all the time because I want to understand that thinking. I don't want to just say it's wrong. I want to understand it. I want to understand where that thought process is coming from. Because, by the way, deep down, we're marketers, right? We're sales guys. We're marketers. How are you the best marketer or the best salesperson? You understand whose mind you're trying to change and why they're buying a different product or why they're using a different service. And that's how you really get to the root of changing that. So I think that answered the question.
Thank you. No, it certainly did. Bryan?
No, I mean, of course, I love what Ted said. I think so much of it is not only what he was explaining, but the reason Ted the generation from a baby boomer perspective, coming from a millennial, I think millennials, it's this idea where we want to go fast, we want to embrace change, and you hear the things like 50% of the workforce today is actually led by millennials. But I will argue for the next 15 years there'll be a giant chunk of non-millennials in the workforce, and to drive any kind of change, to make any kind of success as you move forward, you have to appeal to not only those that are like you, are born the same years, but all of those that are not as well. And I think it's a mistake that we use that. It's almost like a crutch for me, where I feel like some in my generation say, well, soon we're going to be 70% of the workforce, and for me in my head I go, so you're saying you're not going to care about 30% of the workforce? And that is the wrong mentality. It's not the idea that, for me, I've always hated. I actually quit a union job working for UPS because I interviewed for a job. They came back to me and said, Bryan, you are the most qualified, the best person. Letting you know, in 7 years, when you hit the requirement for the amount of years of service and experience, we are going to give you this job. I quit within a week because I said, wait a second, I'm the most qualified, but because I didn't hit a check mark based on these years, I was not going to get the job. That is completely different different than saying that I can't learn from someone that has more experience than me and imply it with what I'm doing today. So I think for me, I look at it as kind of twofold. Not thinking about as a mentor as someone from an age or the years of experience, but ultimately what you can provide them and what they can provide you. It is a mutual experience, and it gives me the chills when I hear someone say, like, I mean, there's a young kid, actually, Joel Comm, our friend, just wrote about him on his Inc. article, and his name's Caleb Maddox. And Caleb Maddox is a 14-year-old kid that's running around like crazy and has inspiring and motivating people, and I had an hour-and-a-half phone call with him, and he made this really nice post afterwards saying that it was the best hour-and-a-half he had had in a long time, and he couldn't believe how much I had kind of shared with him and exposed to him. And I replied back with 11 things that he shared with me that I learned from him. And I think for me, what I would love to kind of I think as we move forward, you have to be okay explaining and demonstrating that not only that you can have a mentor relationship, but what you're able to learn from people that are younger, the same age, and older. And I think millennials, we can't make the mistake. I mean, I made the mistake as a solopreneur thinking that meant I need to do everything on my own, and that just meant I failed at everything. And I think that is something that millennials and Gen Z are especially going to feel that way. And the weird part is, I think we are living in a space and time right now where people are 100% willing and able to share knowledge and open to these conversations. But like Ted said, we're either too afraid to make it a formal ask, or we don't understand how to do it without making it come across as like as a task or something overbearing. Like, I don't look at mentorship as something that I need to do as a checkbox. I look at it as a personal growth of how I become better every single day, is that I believe that I have to think about how can I learn from every person, place, experience, and conversation that I have, and that's a mentor role for me. I mean, reverse mentorship, which is me giving something and them giving something back, it's completely the root of my success. I was 23 years old, and I had a VP come to me and said, Bryan, teach me how to use my BlackBerry, and I will put you in boardrooms that you've never thought you had the ability to be in. And I can tell you, in that next 9 years I worked for that company, so much of my success was because I had access, and I took advantage of that access that he gave me, and it was a back and forth relationship. It wasn't that he was mentoring me as the person that was more senior. It was, hey, I want you to get this from me, and I will give this from you. And I can tell you, I'm so his name is Sandeep, and Sandeep Kaul is his name. He was a senior vice president, and kudos for him for being the one that reached out, because I don't think early on in my career I would have made the ask the other way. The fact that he was the humble one and a senior VP in a company and went to an entry-level employee, I believe we both became better because of that, and that to me is kind of the key as we move forward.
That's awesome, and Bryan, that is a great spot to move over to the Q&A now. So I really wanted to say that how much I appreciate you joining us last minute and speaking for the millennial mindset, and it helped balance out in a balanced conversation. So I really appreciate it, Bryan.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, buddy.
Cheers, man. Hey, Ted, we're going to be taking some questions here. Anybody that has questions, feel free to still drop them onto Twitter using hashtag H2HChat. We've got a rolling number of tweets coming out, some great stuff, and we're actually to the point now where everyone has been so excited about the actual conversation that the questions haven't been asked. We've gone over our limit of conversation and kind of cut the Q&A short, which is totally fine because I think the content here is spectacular. So go ahead and ask some questions now. We'll go ahead and take those. I'm going to kick it off with one question for Ted, and then we'll roll into the questions since I didn't give you very long to do that. So go ahead and set those questions out there now. Ted, I wanted to know from you what's next. Where do you see this going in terms of your own generation? Just speaking on behalf of your generation, what does the next 5 years look like? How do you see growth happening, or do you see growth happening? Do you see it kind of winding up, winding down, staying as is? I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Oh, so I get to speak for my generation?
Yes, you do.
Cool. I didn't even get elected or anything like that.
I just elected you. I hope you don't mind. And I'll even give you a little applause for your generation. So go ahead.
I don't know. You know, it's very hard to prognosticate on the future. I have enough trouble keeping up with the present, you know, and things like that. But what I see happening is I think a lot of things are changing in respect that we've all realized that, again, we're all our own media hubs. We're not only creating the media we want to take in and selecting it where and when we want it, but we're also creating our own. I think people are realizing that, you know, a lot of people have said, oh, we're going to have to work a lot longer than our parents' generation because of the lack of pensions and all those kinds of things. But I think it's less about that, although I don't want to belittle people that financially that's an issue. I think it's more about we have so many more opportunities. I mean, there's just no reason to walk away from work. There's so many other things you could be doing. To simplify it down is something as simple as driving an Uber. I mean, an opportunity like that back in the day was you had to find someone with a taxi or a medallion and see if they'd let you share it, and you never knew what you were getting into or what was happening. But now there's not a person around that can't, you know, again, as long as they have an automobile or have the means to have one. But I'm sure in a short period of time, and I think they're already doing it, they're financing cars for people. So, you know, there's so many opportunities, whether it's even Airbnb your home, so that when you want to travel, you're not leaving an empty home that you're paying for. You're able to rent it out, which can help you then pay for another place. So I think that a lot of what's happening is people are going to stay much more involved. I think they're going to stay a lot more connected. People retired and they left their lives, right? They moved away from their business. They didn't see their business friends anymore. There were so few people. Very often they went into a whole new world of friendship wherever they ended up. I think that's all changing. I think we're all able to continue working, to continue being relevant, to continue making more relevancy for ourselves. So I think that's what you were asking. You were asking bigger picture about life and world and where things are going. And I find that incredibly exciting because, you know, in some ways I'm very tired. You know, I'm 50, approaching 59. I've worked my whole life. I've had my ups and downs. I've had my major successes. I've had my failures, my divorce, my fighting to keep my kids in my life. And some days I wake up and go, damn, you know, I just want this. I want to stop being the rat in the wheel. But the other side says to me, I don't have to think that way. I don't have to think about when am I going to stop. I can think more of when can I start shifting to more of what I love and more of what I want to do. And I'm already doing that. So, I mean, look at this. I get to do what I want. I get to work where I want. I get to travel where I want. I get to speak about what's important to me. And like I say, this is the age of influence where anybody can build a brand, affect change, make a difference 24/7. And, you know, I'm very excited about it. And I know that even the people in my generation that don't express it this way, they're not realizing it, but they're doing it. So they're not talking about it, but what are they doing? They're extending their careers. They're moving on to new careers. I mean, it's easier than ever in the history of humanity to change your career, to change your direction, to start doing something new. So that's what I see happening, and it's what I'm really excited about. And then to wrap around that, and because of course we have to get back to my return on relationship, is that we get to maintain so many relationships that we never were able to do and really know about people's lives. I know about you and your daughter going to college and your son going to camp, and I get to see these things. And, you know, you hear a lot of that nonsense that, well, psychologists say there's only 150 people that you can have in your circle. Well, there's two things about that. Number one is our brains are evolving and that number's expanding. And number two is that thing is always shifting. So it's 150 here and 150 here, and it's moving around. And what that's doing is over the course of a year or a month or a week, it's expanding to a lot bigger number. So that's what I'm really excited about, that awesome. Never has to change for me, and I can stay connected to so many people.
Ted, I'm about to do something that goes against the grain of the Rubin speed of talking. I'm going to have to shorten your answers here, unfortunately, because we only have 7 minutes left, and I have a whole bunch of questions, and I want to get to all of them.
So stop talking.
So if you don't mind, here we go.
Stop.
What's
stop
that?
Stop talking and give me the question.
All right, here we go. Lisa Pattenden, I believe is how you say it, at London Lady. Where do you see the opportunities for the UK given the gloom and doom scenarios recently? Tips for keeping above the waterline?
Okay, first of all, blah, 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 doom and gloom. There's doom and gloom here in this country, too. So, basically, I think that things are just changing. Whatever is happening now, I'm not an expert by any means about what's happening with Brexit, or I don't live there. I am not from the UK, so I can't necessarily speak to you. But I think that, the beauty is that you have a global audience, and you can share it with everybody, and just keep doing what you're doing, Lisa. You're a beautiful person, and I'm sure that everything in that respect is going to work out fine.
Good. Stacy DiPolo from GoDaddy, one of our favorite people that joins H2H every week, and also friend. Do you see anything unique in terms of brand advocacy or tribal marketing with millennials versus others?
I think that the major difference is they're just more accustomed to it. They're used to communicating with people. They don't think twice about communicating with a brand, whereas our generation thinks like, I've heard people say, oh, it's kind of stupid to talk to a brand, or why would you care if Oreo likes you? But I think that they've, again, back to the old world you grew up with, they're digital natives. This is second nature to them. So I think advocacy in one form or another, advocacy and influence is going to become a regular part of their lives. And I don't mean to put down any of your questions. I'm just trying to answer quick like Bryan asked.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Ben. Lynn, our friend Lynn Johnson, as we all know Lynn, she's such a great person. Really enjoyed having her here. What tool do you use to input your new contacts, Ted? Do you use the old Rolodex or some kind of tool?
I used the word Rolodex the other day, and someone said to me, what's a Rolodex? And I laughed. I use kind of an old-fashioned method. I don't use tools because I like to put in notes and things like that. And when you feed the cards into these apps, you don't get a lot of that stuff. Or, by the way, I might just be wrong because I usually know very little about the capabilities of a lot of these apps. But what I do is I have an assistant enter them. So I take the cards. I usually almost always personally connect with those people on every social platform with a personal note. Don't send out a LinkedIn request without something personal. I always also like to try to mention something we conversed. And then I have an intern, someone I'm paying a nominal fee to, who put them in, so each stack of cards is labeled with an event, a date, and then on the cards themselves I'll write little notes.
That's great. And again, the tools that you use, what was that?
The tools it's called a pen. So I write on the cards and I photograph them and send them to my intern.
Which goes into Google?
I'm sorry. It goes into Google Contacts.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Janet
by the way,
Fouts.
quick thing, Bryan Kramer and Steve Dotto have been pushing hard to get me to use Evernote. I don't know if Evernote does contacts, but I know it does a whole host of other things. In my retirement, I'm going to learn how to use it. Go ahead.
So I use Nimble.
Okay.
Nimble's
so I back up stuff in Nimble, but I don't use it as my main contacts.
Got it. Yep. There's no one way. All right. Janet Fouts, another great friend of H2H and personal friend here in Willow Glen, who we're going to have coffee with soon. What leads you to looking for and choosing a mentor?
I don't think I've ever looked for a mentor. It usually ends up being, I meet a lot of people. Look, I'm very fortunate that way. I travel a lot. I do a lot of events. I go to a lot of meetings, and I usually just find people that I just have a way. I see someone that's smart, and I say, man, I want to learn from this person. And then the second step is, do I relate to this person? Is it somebody that I can connect with? And then, like I said, I don't ask them to be my mentor. I just start asking them their opinion and things like that, and it kind of takes on itself. I've had that relationship with Bryan in many respects. Raj Sethi is another great mentor for people that you might know from this world, and then others are just from my personal life. So for me, one thing I do is every job I've ever had, every place I've ever lived, I always try to leave that place with at least one person that becomes part of that tribe and that group of who I learn from.
Great. Ted, we are unfortunately out of time. We could keep going with this. As you all can tell, there's a lot of great stuff here. We're going to have you on again soon for another topic. There's plenty of topics out there that we can do. But really appreciate you being on with us. Is there any closing thought that you wanted to share with everybody?
Yeah, the last thought I want to leave, because we were talking about mentorship and learning from other people, is there's another really important group of people every one of you, or a big group of you, can learn from. Learn from your kids. And I mean learn from by watching them, by seeing what they do. I don't mean asking them questions so they teach you something. I mean by observing the way they live, the natural things that children do in their lives. If it's not your own kids, it's other kids. But understand, it's not just about us teaching them. It's about the things we can learn from them.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much again for being on the show. And if anybody needs to reach you, I know that you can be reached just about everywhere on social media. Do you have a favorite place you want to point them to?
Again, it's at Ted Rubin on Twitter. It's Ted Rubin on Facebook, on every other platform. My email address is tedrubin@gmail.com. My phone number is 516-270-5511. Reach out anytime. Looking forward to hearing from
Awesome.
any of you who feel like reaching out.
The man just shared his phone number, so if you don't call him, it's your bad, not his. Okay, thanks so much, Ted. Everyone out there, we're going to see you next Monday, same time, same place. Make it a great week, and we will see you all soon. Cheers.